Nalitha had always been the dependable one in her family, the kind of person who quietly took on responsibility without complaint. She lived in Kenton, South Africa, a small town where everyone knew everyone else, and her life had always revolved around keeping her household running. Her brother, Kwame, was the opposite, charming, lazy, and endlessly spoiled. Whatever he wanted, he got, and everyone seemed to forgive him instantly. When their father became seriously ill, Nalitha's mother looked at her with tired eyes and said, "Nalitha, you'll handle the bills, the groceries, and the hospital. Kwame has enough stress already." Nalitha smiled, the way she always did when asked to carry more than her fair share, but inside, she felt a surge of anger she couldn't ignore. It wasn't fair. She was expected to do everything while Kwame carried nothing. Months passed, and every penny seemed to vanish from her account. Rent, medicine, groceries, even Kwame's car repairs. All of it came from her. Meanwhile, he spent weekends in Kebra, partying with friends, oblivious to the work she did to keep the family afloat. One night, sitting alone at her kitchen table after paying yet another bill, Nalitha whispered to herself, "Maybe it's time they see what life looks like without me fixing it." It was the first spark of rebellion, the moment she realized she couldn't keep living like this. From that quiet frustration, a plan began to form, one that would eventually change everything, not just for her family, but for herself. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to take a turn, and this time she would take control. Months later, their father passed away, leaving a heavy silence over the house in Kenton. Nalitha felt it deeply, but grief didn't stop the responsibilities from piling up. From the moment they started planning the funeral, she found herself doing everything. She organized the catering, booked the venue, coordinated with relatives, and made sure every guest felt cared for. Her mother, worn and tearful, kept saying, "Kwame is grieving deeply. Let him rest." Nalitha smiled politely and nodded, but she noticed him slipping outside, phone in hand, laughing and joking with friends. It was a punch to her chest. The contrast between her endless work and his carefree world felt unbearable. When the day came to deal with the inheritance, the tension in the room was thick. The family lawyer read the statement carefully. "The family house shall be shared equally between the two children." Nalitha felt a flicker of relief. Finally, some recognition of her sacrifice. But then her mother leaned in and whispered words that cut deeper than any grief. "You don't need half, Nalitha. You have a job. Your brother doesn't." The room spun for a moment. Every bill she'd paid, every sleepless night she'd endured, every ounce of effort she'd poured into keeping the family afloat, it all seemed invisible. Her heart ached with a mix of anger, disappointment, and sorrow. That night, after the funeral, Nalitha quietly packed her things. She didn't make a scene, didn't shout or cry. She simply walked out. The air outside felt different, heavy with the rain, yet freeing in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't running from grief. She was running towards something she had never allowed herself before, a life for herself. Her plan was simple, clear, and unshakable. She would leave Kenton, leave the entitled demands and unfair expectations behind, and start fresh somewhere far away. No one would rely on her to fix their mistakes. No one would take her sacrifices for granted, and for the first time in her life, she would be the one in control. As she closed the door behind her, Nalitha felt a strange mix of sadness and empowerment. She was heartbroken, yes, but also ready. Ready to build a life on her own terms, where her worth wouldn't be measured by how much she carried for others. That night marked not just an ending, but the quiet beginning of Nalitha's own story, a story she would write completely for herself. Nalitha settled into Eastfield quietly, carrying nothing but the lessons of her past and the determination to make a life of her. It was a small city, nothing like Kenton, and it gave her the space she needed to start over without anyone's expectations weighing her down. She found a job as an assistant accountant at a logistics firm. At first, it was just a paycheck, a way to survive, but she threw herself into it with a dedication that made her coworkers take notice. She was reliable, precise, and organized, the kind of employee everyone wished they had. Months turned into years, and slowly but surely, Nalitha began to rise. Promotions came, first to senior accountant, then to manager. Every step up meant more responsibility, but this time, it was her choice, her success. She wasn't managing a family's mistakes anymore. She was building her own career, brick by brick, with no one taking credit for her work. Despite the long hours and occasional stress, she loved it. There were no unfair comparisons, no whispers about what she should do. It was hers completely and fully. Meanwhile, Nalitha quietly began investing in real estate. She started small, buying a modest apartment with her first big bonus. Each promotion added another piece to her growing portfolio. She wasn't flaunting her success. She didn't need to. She was building something stable, something that could survive without her constant attention, unlike the chaos she'd left behind. Back in Kenton, things were very different. Kwame, once adored and untouchable, was struggling. Jobless, broke, and drowning in debt, he had no one to bail him out anymore. Nalitha had stepped out of that world, and without her constant fixing, the consequences of his choices had caught up. Her mother, proud and independent in her own ways, still carried on, but the household stability that Nalitha had silently provided was gone. Nalitha never gloated. She didn't need to. She watched from a distance as life's natural balance began to reassert itself. Karma, she realized, was patient, and it was finally circling back. Meanwhile, she focused on her own growth, enjoying the satisfaction of progress that wasn't measured by others' approval. She had found peace in building a life that was completely hers, a life where hard work paid off and respect was earned, not demanded. For the first time, Nalitha felt free. Free from guilt, free from expectations, and free to shape her destiny. The silent years weren't lonely, they were powerful. They were hers. And she knew, deep down, that the future she was quietly building would be stronger than anything she'd left behind. One rainy evening, Nalitha's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw her mother's name. There was a tremor in her mother's voice when she answered. "Baby, please, your brother is in trouble. The house might be taken. We need you to come home." For a moment, Nalitha almost said no. She had built a life in Eastfield, far from the chaos of Kenton, a life where she was in control. But something deep in her heart told her to go. She needed to see for herself what had become of the place she had once carried on her shoulders. By the time she arrived, the rain had soaked through her coat, but the sight that greeted her made her shiver for a different reason. The family house, once full of laughter and warmth, now looked abandoned. Paint peeled from the walls, gutters sagged, and the garden had become a tangle of weeds. It wasn't just the house that had fallen apart, the life inside it had too. On the porch, Kwame sat hunched over, unshaven and clearly drunk. His usual charm was gone, replaced with desperation and defeat. Nalitha's mother met her at the door, tears running down her face. "You're the only one who can fix this, Nalitha. You always were." Nalitha studied the house, the broken windows, the leaking roof, and her brother's slumped shoulders. She felt a familiar tug of responsibility, the old pull that had defined so much of her life. But this time, she wasn't the same girl who had quietly carried everything for everyone else. She took a deep breath and said softly, "Yes, Mama. But this time, I'll fix it my way." Her mother blinked in surprise, and Kwame looked up, confusion flashing across his face. Nalitha wasn't just stepping in to patch things up. She was taking control, setting the rules, and deciding the terms. She felt the weight of years of unfairness lift slightly as she realized that helping didn't have to mean sacrificing herself. For the first time, she saw the possibility of fixing what had been broken without losing herself in the process. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her, tumultuous but cleansing. Nalitha knew that whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms. And just like that, in the middle of the rain and the ruin, she felt the first spark of true power she had ever known. Instead of rushing in to pay off the debts, Nalitha took a deep breath and slowed down. She didn't want to act on impulse this time. The first thing she did was ask for every document she could get her hands on, the house's title deeds, loan records, and any agreements Kwame had signed for his business. Her family watched her work, expecting her usual selfless response, but Nalitha had something different in mind. As she went through the papers, her heart sank and then hardened. Kwame had secretly mortgaged the house not once, but twice, using it to fund his failing business ventures. The bank was only days away from seizing the property. Her mother's panic grew, and Kwame, too drunk to understand the seriousness of the situation, begged her to do something. Nalitha listened quietly, her mind calculating every step. Then she acted calmly, deliberately. She approached the bank with a plan of her own. She offered to buy the house outright in her name and clear every debt. The bank agreed immediately. The numbers worked, and they had someone willing to take responsibility. Her family looked relieved, thinking she was saving them, rescuing the house they had all treated so carelessly. But they didn't realize that she wasn't saving them at all. This time, Nalitha was saving herself. When the papers were signed, she held the deed in her hand, the house legally hers, not Kwame's, not her mother's. She walked out of the office and felt a quiet thrill as she slid the keys into her pocket. Outside, the wind carried a faint smell of rain and dust from the city streets. She whispered to herself, "Now we're even." For the first time, Nalitha felt the balance shift. Years of being overlooked, taken for granted, and burdened had been accounted for. She wasn't cruel, and she hadn't acted out of revenge. She had acted out of clarity for herself. Owning the house wasn't just about property. It was about control, about reclaiming the power she had given away for too long. As she looked at her family, their faces a mixture of relief and confusion, Nalitha smiled softly. She had stepped in when it mattered, but this time on her terms. She wasn't the girl who carried everything for everyone anymore. She was the woman who finally got to decide how her own life would be run. And in that moment, she knew the tide had turned. A week later, Nalitha's phone rang again. Her mother was inviting her over for dinner. Nalitha hesitated but agreed, curious to see how they would react now that the house was saved, and hers. She arrived to the familiar smells of home-cooked food, the worn furniture, and the sense of small-town intimacy. Her family welcomed her warmly at first, praising her generosity and hard work. For a moment, she almost allowed herself to relax. But the mood shifted the second they noticed the house deed on the table. Nalitha had left it there casually, as if it were just another piece of paperwork, but its meaning hit them immediately. Kwame's face twisted in anger. "You tricked us," he shouted, his voice cracking with frustration and disbelief. Her mother's reaction was quieter, but no less sharp. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You stole from your own family." Nalitha stayed calm, her voice steady and measured. "No," she said firmly, looking at both of them. "I paid for the house that you destroyed. I fixed what you broke. I just didn't do it your way." She watched Kwame's face turn red with fury, the frustration of years of carelessness and entitlement boiling over in. She walked to the table and placed the keys down carefully, as if closing a chapter that had been open far too long. Her eyes met her mother's, then her brother's. "If you want it back," she said softly, "pay me back every cent." There was no anger in her tone, no bitterness. Only clarity, only the power of someone who had finally set boundaries. Her mother could only sob quietly, and Kwame stood frozen, his mouth open, words failing him. Nalitha felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't a doormat either. She had taken control, drawn a line, and finally been seen for the person she had always been, capable, smart, and unafraid to protect herself. For the first time, Nalitha realized that love didn't always mean giving endlessly. Sometimes it meant standing firm and saying no. And in that quiet, tense living room, with the rain pattering softly outside, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had finally leveled the playing field, not with anger or revenge, but with careful, deliberate strength. Word about Nalitha spread quickly through Kenton. People whispered her name with a mix of admiration and judgment. Some called her cruel, saying she had tricked her family. Others called her wise, impressed by the way she had taken control of her life and finally stood up for herself. Nalitha didn't mind what others thought. She had long stopped living for anyone else's approval. She decided to rent out the family house to tenants. The steady income allowed her to invest in something she had dreamed of for years, a financial literacy hub for young women. She wanted to give others the knowledge she had wished she'd had when she was carrying her family's burden. Helping young women manage their money, plan for the future, and stand on their own feet became her new mission. Every promotion, every tenant payment, and every successful workshop felt like a small victory, reclaiming of her power and purpose. Kwame and her mother, stubborn and too proud to apologize, moved to a smaller house outside town. Nalitha didn't gloat. She didn't want to see them suffer, but she made sure they were never truly in need. Quietly, she covered their basic expenses, rent, groceries, even unexpected bills, all under another name. They never knew it was her. She didn't want recognition or thanks. She just wanted them to survive without letting them take advantage of her again. For Nalitha, revenge was no longer the goal. She had once carried the weight of her family's mistakes and learned the hard way that self-sacrifice without respect only led to exhaustion and pain. Now, she focused on peace, her own peace, and a subtle protection of those she cared about. She had rewritten the rules. She wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. She was someone who could help, but only on her own terms. In the quiet moments, when she walked through the hallways of the house she legally owned but no longer lived in, Nalitha felt a sense of calm she had never known. The chaos of the past was behind her. Her life was finally hers to shape, her choices finally hers to make. And that more than money, more than the house or any victory over her family, felt like freedom. It was the aftermath she had been waiting for, a life built on respect, balance, and quiet strength. Years had passed since Nalitha had taken control of her life and her family's house. One quiet afternoon, she was working in her office at the Financial Literacy Hub when a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Kwame. He looked different, thinner, older, and, for the first time, genuinely humble. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something that resembled regret. "Sis," he said quietly, his voice low and careful, "I messed up. You were right about everything." Nalitha paused and studied him. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She could see the years of struggle etched into his face, the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him. Finally, she nodded. "You learned the hard way," she said softly. "But you learned." There was no anger in her voice, only the quiet acknowledgement that he had finally seen the truth. He shifted nervously and handed her a small brown envelope. "It's the first repayment," he said. "I'll make it right." Nalitha took it, feeling the weight of it in her hands. But for the first time, she realized it wasn't about the money anymore. That chapter of debt and injustice had already closed. What mattered now was dignity, growth, and lessons learned, his and hers. For the first time since all the struggles began, Nalitha smiled at him without pain. There was no bitterness, no resentment, only a sense of completion. She had carried her family for so long, and now she had learned to carry herself. And seeing Kwame finally take responsibility, even in a small way, felt like a strange kind of healing. They sat together for a few minutes in silence, just looking at each other. Nalitha realized that life had a way of teaching lessons in the hardest ways, but sometimes it also gave second chances. She had once been the overlooked daughter, the one who fixed everything, the one who carried the weight of others. Now she was someone who had found balance, respect, and peace. Kwame left eventually, walking out of her office more humble than she had ever seen him. Nalitha watched him go, a small, satisfied smile lingering on her face. This wasn't about money or power anymore. It was about understanding, growth, and the rare gift of seeing someone finally learn the value of responsibility. In that quiet moment, Nalitha felt lighter than she had in years, free from the past and ready for whatever the future held. Months after Kwame's visit, Nalitha's financial literacy hub had grown far beyond what she had imagined. What had started as a small office in Eastfield, helping a few young women understand money and budgeting, had expanded into a full center with workshops, online courses, and a team of dedicated staff. Women from across the region came to learn, to gain confidence, and to take control of their own finances. Nalitha had become a respected voice, not just for financial knowledge, but for the wisdom of setting boundaries and valuing oneself. Her own story often came up during talks and interviews. One day, during a live interview, she was asked what she wanted women to take away from her. She paused for a moment, thinking of her years carrying burdens that were never hers to bear. Then she said, "Love doesn't mean carrying everyone's weight. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting them grow." Her words resonated, not just with the audience, but with herself. She realized that all the struggles, sacrifices, and careful planning had led her here, to a place where she could teach others to protect themselves while still caring for those around them. Messages started pouring in from women who had been told, "You'll handle everything," or "You're strong, you can do it all." Many shared stories of exhaustion, frustration, and being overlooked, just as Nalitha once had. She replied personally when she could, offering advice, encouragement, and reassurance. She had been in their shoes, and now she could guide them to a life where their worth wasn't measured by how much they carried for others. Through all of this, Nalitha felt a deep sense of peace. She had learned that true power wasn't about controlling others or fixing every problem. It was about understanding her own value, creating boundaries, and using her energy wisely. She hadn't just built a financial center. She had built a life that honored her strength, her intelligence, and her choices. For the first time in years, Nalitha didn't feel the old weight of guilt or obligation. She didn't have to rescue anyone to prove her worth. Her success wasn't about revenge or showing her family. It was about self-respect and helping others find the same. Looking around her busy center, watching women take small but powerful steps toward independence, she knew she had come full circle. Nalitha's journey had taught her that fixing herself was the first step to helping others. By setting boundaries and claiming her own life, she had created not just financial freedom, but emotional freedom as well. And in that freedom, she found something far more lasting than approval or admiration, a quiet, steady peace that came from knowing she had finally chosen herself. Years had passed since Nalitha had taken control of her life, and one late afternoon, she found herself standing outside her childhood. The house looked different now, freshly painted, the garden tidy, and laughter spilling from inside as a young family enjoyed their evening together. It was a peaceful scene, and for Nalitha, it felt almost surreal. Her mother approached slowly, frail and older than she remembered, leaning slightly on her cane. She stopped beside Nalitha and whispered softly, "You were always the strong one. We just didn't see it." Nalitha felt a lump in her throat, but smiled gently. She wrapped her mother in a long hug, holding her close for a moment, and said, "I didn't stop being your daughter. I just learned to be my own person." They stood together in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the children playing and the wind rustling through the trees. Nalitha's heart felt light, free from the weight that had once crushed her. For years, she had carried responsibilities that weren't hers, fixed mistakes that weren't hers to fix, and sacrificed her own happiness for a family that didn't always appreciate it. But now she had found balance. She had learned to care without losing herself, to give without being used, and to love without being taken for granted. As the sun began to set behind the house that had once broken her heart, Nalitha felt a quiet joy wash over her. Her journey had come full circle, from the overlooked, overburdened daughter to a woman who had rewritten her own destiny. She had survived, grown, and thrived on her own terms. And in that golden light, she smiled, finally at peace with her past, proud of the woman she had become, and ready for whatever came next.